Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to share with you some tips on how to choose a palette of colours before you start to paint. So it's something I get asked about all the time. Do I choose my colours before I make a start? And today I'm going to show you my thought process when I'm studying a photo reference and thinking about a palette of colours. So I hope that you enjoy this and find it very helpful. If you do, please do subscribe here on YouTube for all my other free content. Do have a look around in the other playlists, as I've got lots of other instructional videos like this one. And also consider checking me out over on Patreon for my full catalogue of real-time tutorials and lots more. So I'm going to make use of my recent little barn owl study to show you how I decided which colours to place in my tray before I started to paint. And if you're interested in seeing how I painted this, it is on my YouTube channel here as a full-length paint-along demo, so you can actually spend 4 hours with me painting along with me and create your own owl. So do check that out afterwards. But to help you see why I chose the colours that I chose for this piece, let's have a look at the photo reference, which I would have studied for a while before making a start. So this is the photo reference of my barn owl. And when I first look at a photo reference that I'm about to paint, the very first thing that I always try to determine is the direction of the light. So what direction is the light source coming from here? And we can see that the sunlight is coming really from the top right of the owl. And that casts some pretty strong shadows across the bird. Instantly I know that I'm going to need different colours for the shadow side of the bird and a different set of colours for the parts of the bird that are in sunlight. But the main place to start is just to make sure that you have a range of colours which will cover your highlights, your midtones and your darks. And you can see from this palette here I've really thought about my highlight colours, my midtones and also some of the darker colours that I've chosen. So I know that tonally I've got a good range here already. Then, as I said before, when I'm thinking about the colour themselves, so perhaps the temperature or the hue of the colour, I know from this photo reference with the amount of shadow cast that I'm going to need both warm and cool. So if I can get myself a palette that covers a little bit of all of that in the beginning, I know I've got somewhere to start. So let's have a look at the colour palette I chose, and I'll try to explain why I made these selections. So firstly, you'll see my light tints up here, and I would call these my warm light tints. And you can see that there's a lot of this colour in the bird, so lighter yellows, right up to brightest white. So I will actually use pure white in this. But a lot of other warm tints, and with most paintings I find I need a range of these light warm tints. Then to counter that though, in the shadows I know I'm going to need some cooler light tints. I'm going to need to make it seem colder in the shadows. So down this side of the bird, for example, I don't want to let any of these light warm tints into these areas. Otherwise it will really ruin the light and shade effect. So from first looking at this photo reference, I know that I'm going to need a whole other set of colours to depict these shadow areas. And that's where these light lilacs, one of my favourites, BV7, a very cold light blue tint, right through to some actual vibrant blue, which I've made use of down the side of the bird. And when I really look at the photo reference, I can see very vibrant blue in there. And it's all about just training your eyes to see more colour and to trust that the colours you're seeing, even though you know it's a white bird, that you really might find some very vibrant blue on there. And then a similar lilac blue or blue violet, again to add to those shadow areas. So just from looking at the photo reference initially, I know that I'm going to need to add warmth on some of the white parts of the bird, but I know that some of the white parts are also in shadow and I'm going to need to add cooler colours. Also, let's look at the rest of the warmth on the bird. So even within the shadow areas here, if I use entirely all blues and cold colours, it will look very cold, and we're still talking about a warm-blooded creature which is white, so we don't want it to look too cold. So I do bring in some more flesh coloured tones. I would call this one of my grey tones, even though it's almost brown. This is A27. So adding some of that warmer tone into my shadow areas also helps just to keep the 3D effect. And let's have a think about the background as well. So I changed the background in the photo reference, but I wanted to keep the green theme going because quite a lot of green gets reflected off the white feathers as well. So I did want to include some green within the bird just to give the effect of all of that greenery reflecting off the bird. So for my background, I chose myself a simple palette of greens, and this lighter green in particular, which I've used in many places in the background, is the green then that I used on some of the feathers just to add some of those reflections. So by using this green in the background and also on the owl itself, it really helps bring some colour harmony into your work. So always try to think of ways that you can include some of your background colours in your main subject. And I've done that a few times in this piece. I've used some of this lovely blue violet to create some of the out of focus areas of the background. And then of course by using them in the owl, it just helps to tie the background and the subject matter together, especially if you're mixing and matching with your photo reference. Then just lastly, for the warm parts of the owl, I chose myself a range from some vibrant orange yellows through to some brown earths. And I'm just always trying to pick out individual colours in the photo reference and give myself a little range to get started with. So I may not have chosen absolutely every one of these colours at the very beginning. I think I needed to add in a couple of extra tints in both the warm area and in the cool area. So as I paint, I may well pick up some extra colours. Not everything that I choose from the beginning gets used, and it's not always exactly the right selection, but I've always got a good basis to get going with. And in terms of choosing some pastel pencil colours for a project, normally I will set a few out in my tray along with the soft pastels, and a lot of the time I'm just trying to match some of those colours that I've already chosen with some of my pencil colours. So for example, I've got my pure white to go along with this, usually for when I need to create smaller edges on something, and I'll use this to drag some of my softer pigment out, and also a light tint in a warmer yellow tone, more like this one, and then of course cooler tints as well. So I've got my white and my cool light tint and my warm light tint, just like I've got with my soft pastels here. And then usually a range of dark colours, maybe a black, a brown, in this case perhaps some warmer shades of brown for some of these areas of the owl. So if I reorganise these slightly, you're going to see now on this top row pretty much all the colours I chose myself to create all of the white areas on the owl, so not including the warm brown tones. That row really just deals with all of the white, both in sunlight and down to the darkest of shadows. So even though it's depicting white, this really is my darkest value in some of the shadows. and right up to my brightest white. So if you're painting a white subject, this is a small indication of some of the colours you might need. This was a reasonably simple palette to put together because it's a small piece and there's quite a simple background and just one small subject matter. But it's a brilliant exercise to do before any time you paint, and you will get better at it over time. Also, there will, after time, be certain colours that you find yourself choosing out for every painting, just colours that you really like to use, and that often becomes a bit like your signature palette. So colour really is worth playing with. It can really define you as an artist, and this is hopefully one exercise that if you're not already doing it, it will help you with all of your colour choices in future. So thanks for watching, and as always, I'd really appreciate if you would like and subscribe here on YouTube, and I'll add some links in the description below to my Patreon channel if you want to learn more.